Hello and welcome to My Week at the Club, episode number 23, I believe. This is Roger Capello bringing you the action from the Wachusett Chess Club in Fitchburg, Mass. And this week it was round 3 of the George Sturgis Memorial, and I was playing white against Alexander Venezia. And Alex, I played once a few months ago and recorded that video, and you could go take a look and see how that turned out. This time around I was white. The last time I believe I was black. And I opened against Alex. I wanted to mention before I got going, that's right, to explain the pictures. That's Alex in the upper right-hand corner playing a different game against me. In the middle picture is Saturn from a Cassini photo taken from behind Saturn. That is, it's away from the sun behind Saturn, and what you're seeing is it backlit. And it's quite a ghostly effect of the rings being illuminated from behind by the sun like that. It's kind of a neat shot, I think. Okay, so I opened up with d4, and I better get my focus going here. And Alex replied knight f6, a flexible move, possibly signaling an Indian system, but it also could turn into a queen's gambit. I went ahead and went down the sort of queen's gambit path, and he committed himself then with a definite Indian system, looking for a king's Indian or possibly a Benoni, something like that. I played knight c3, he fianchettoed his bishop, and I played e4, which is all the standard move. He played d6. It's not absolutely necessary. He could castle here, but then you'd have to know what to do if white decides to push the e-pawn. It's simpler just to go ahead and prevent it with the playing the pawn to d6 as he did. I played knight f3, which is main line of the King's Indian defense, white side of it. He castled. I played bishop e2, which is the classical variation. There are other possibilities. I actually, back here, before I played the knight out to f3, I could go into a Samish with f3, and that's kind of an interesting system. It can get quite a few lively attacks coming out of that because of the anchoring of that e-pawn and also supporting a possible expansion on the king side. But that wasn't what I was interested in today, or on Wednesday. And so I played the classical line, bishop to e2. And he countered immediately with a center thrust. Okay, so if if white doesn't try to win a pawn, which he can't really do, then a sensible plan for him is to go ahead and to push the d-pawn. And black can respond by playing the knight out, either through d7 or a6. In this case, Alex chose to come through a6, which is fine. It looks a little awkward there on the side of the board, but it's part of a coherent opening plan. White goes ahead and castles in this variation, and then Alex played his knight back to e8. Now, this is I marked it as dubious. It's really a bit of a mistake and causes him some trouble, as you'll see in the game. Really what should happen here is that black plays his knight immediately to c5, and then that puts pressure on this e-pawn, which is attacked more than it's defended, so I have to defend it with my queen, and that then gives him time to play his pawn out to a5, which is important because that makes c5 be a stable square for his knight. Otherwise, he won't be able, if he puts a knight there, he won't be able to keep it if he doesn't have time to get this a5 move in. So the way it's played in the game, for example, with him going back to knight e8, then I have time to play a3, and if he plays his knight then into, well, if he played his knight into f5, or c5 rather, then I have time to chase it away, and he's got, very bad position after he drops the knight back. Um, it's even worse here because he removed the knight pressure off of e4, so that made it even easier for me to kick away the knight. But even if the knight were kept on f6 without moving the knight in then and holding it with the a5 move, you're unable to establish the knight on that square. So when he dropped the knight back, this is sort of telegraphing the move. He wants to play the f-pawn forward. And there's not really a whole lot I can do about it. So I went ahead with my idea of expanding on the queen side, which is what black usually does, or white usually does in the King's Indian. So I played my a-pawn, he played pawn to f5, and now I felt that I didn't really need to do anything special about this because if he were to take it, my pawn at this point, my e-pawn, I'll be able to take back with my knight, and that's a nice post for my knight in front of his pawn. So he doesn't really want to exchange pawns. So instead, I took the time to come out and basically establish an awkward pin against his knight, or at least to cause a little disorganization in his king side. It didn't have to be a pin. At this point, I attacked his queen, and he really has three choices, but none of them are good. He could play the queen up to d7, but now that's an awkward square for the queen. It's being it's holding the bishop in behind it. It's getting in the way of his own development. Another possibility would be to play his bishop to f6, in which case I was planning to go with my bishop to h6, attacking his rook, and then he has nothing better than to drop back with his bishop, and I was planning to exchange, and I was happy to trade off that dark squared bishop and to weaken all those dark squares on his king side. So that would have been an outcome I'd be happy with. And the third possibility is to do what he did, which is to block with the knight. But of course that puts it into a pin. And it works pretty well for me to pin that knight. Although I may be forced at some point to exchange my bishop for the knight, so I have to be kind of willing to go into that possibility. I played b4, which continues on with my idea of advancing on the queen side, and he pushed his f-pawn, which is interesting. It releases the tension that we had on the e4 and f5 squares of the two pawns facing down each other, but it also is kind of the first part of a thrust of the rest of his kingside pawns toward my king. So at this point, I expect a g-pawn to follow and possibly h-pawn as well coming down the board. And furthermore, it traps my bishop because from now on, there's really no way for me to conveniently keep my bishop from getting traded off on the king side. So if he, let's just go ahead and make a move for white here. If he didn't do this, but if he wanted to play h6 immediately, attacking my bishop, then I no longer have the option even of falling back with it because it would get lost. It just comes back, then he plays g5, and now it's easy to see that the bishop is totally lost. Maybe I can get two pawns for it with knight takes on g5. It might not be horrible, but it's probably not something I want to go into, and I have to be prepared to either make that sacrifice or exchange my bishop for the knight. Now, in the game, after I played the rook to c1, he didn't push the h-pawn immediately. Although that's a theme that could come up, since it's a forcing move, could have come up any time in the next half dozen moves or so during this game. I played rook to c1 for a couple of reasons. One of the main reasons was that I was uncomfortable with the bishop on g7, eyeing this a1 square. There's a lot of stuff in between, but some of the combinations I was looking at would result in move sequences, not really combinations, would result in this e-pawn either going forward or recapturing, and that would expose the attack of my bishop, of his bishop on my rook. That's, of course, also assuming that he breaks this pin, but that's not hard for him to do. So I got my rook off of that square. Also, it supports the c5 square. Oops, I didn't mean to push his pawn to c5. Supports the c5 square for a possible future push of my c-pawn. So it's got a couple of good things going for it, and that's why I made it. And at this point, Alex made a mistake, and it's really a big enough mistake that it is fairly decisive in the game. So at this point, if we turn on Stockfish, before his mistake, it's showing that I'm, maybe 3/4 of a pawn or so ahead. So, it's white is added to his advantage a bit, but not by very much. After this move, it's up around 2.5 pawns, which is a decisive advantage. It's enough to win for, I don't know, people playing hit a level higher than mine, but I've certainly blown 2.5 point advantages. But it's nice to have that much of a pull in the position. I'll turn that guy off. So as you can see, Stockfish is clamoring for c5 is the way to refute that. And I did not play c5. I looked at the position for about 10 minutes. Took quite a long think, and came up with a plan that didn't involve c5. Now, c5 is a strong move. There's no doubt about it. And I guess I didn't play it because I was thinking that the pawn would be too weak on c5 because of the pawn and the knight attacking it and only the pawn defending it. And so that, there might be a sequence such as, let's see, c5, and then if he took and I took back and he recaptured, it seemed to me like maybe I was losing a pawn in this deal. That's not a valid sequence of moves, though, because if I play c5, right, and we'll just turn this on so you can see what's happening. The top choice for the engine is for him to go ahead and take the pawn, and for me to take back, but not for me to take back, I'm sorry. But yeah, of course, for me to trade off the knight with the bishop at this point. All right, so that knight's being looked at. I can simply take it. He takes back. And then I take back the c-pawn. And now I've got, a real breakthrough of pawns here in the center. This looks very bad for black. I'll turn that engine off. So instead of playing c5, what I chose to do, let's go back one more move here, was a sequence that involved exchanging his c-pawn. I kind of hated to do it because strategically I felt that he was really cramped. He was having trouble developing his queenside pieces, and I didn't want to open up some lines over here to ease his development. But if you have more mobility, sometimes opening up the position is actually a good thing as long as you can benefit immediately from opening up the position. And I decided that I could benefit immediately with this sequence of moves, where I exchange off the c-pawns, and then I play my queen out to a4, attacking that pawn. And my plan was that he would defend it somehow. And it's a little awkward to defend because, he would like to play his bishop here, ideally, to d7 and defend it at the same time threatening my queen through the pawn. But the problem is, of course, that would hang the knight here because it's relying on the bishop for defense. So he can't do that. He could play the bishop to b7 to defend it, but then it's not threatening anything too special. And so after he defends it somehow, the plan then was to play my rook over to d1. What he chose to do was to go ahead and push the c-pawn. Now, it turns out in this position, instead of playing queen to a4, Stockfish would like an immediate c5. And I don't really want to take the time now, I guess, to go into these lines, but it blows open the center here. Admittedly, it's a very good looking, well, I'll just show you the principal variation after c5. If he then takes time out to chase away my bishop on the king side, I capture and he recaptures, and then I win the pawn on d6. He could play the rook to d8, defending it, and I would not bother to, one of the possibilities is not bothering to support it, because I could come out here and attack this knight a second time. It's attacked now by the bishop and the queen, and he'd have to do something about it, retreating it back to b8. And this is a very dynamic position. I could then go ahead and continue to attack on the queen side, temporarily not worrying about him regaining this pawn. I mean, this is all looks very good for white, but there are a lot of lines here, a lot of possibilities, and I really didn't want to do that. With the line that I chose instead of that, trading and then bringing the queen out to a4 seemed simpler to me, because there was a narrow set of variations that he didn't have much choice about what to do. Okay, instead of defending the c-pawn, he went ahead and pushed it, which is good because it prevents my c-pawn then from coming up and attacking that pawn on that weak pawn on d6. So instead, I played my rook over to d1, attacking indirectly the queen along that file, half-open file. And this square on d6, of course, is very weak, and it's going to be hard for him to defend it adequately. And right now, I'm threatening, among other things, to just to go ahead and take the e-pawn with my knight, because his pawn is pinned. So in this position, after I played rook f to d1, he actually did take time out here to resolve the situation on the king side, but also to get another defender of e5. So he played pawn to h6, and as I spoke about before, I was forced to trade, which I did. And after the trade, now he has the bishop defending e5. But he has only the one defense on d6, and now I can attack it a second time. And how is he going to defend that? I mean, he could defend it with the bishop that he just maneuvered, but if he does that, then this e-pawn is going to fall, right? If he does something like this, and then knight takes, this pawn is pinned, you can't take it back. So there's really no good answer to this. And at this point, he dropped back with his knight to c7. I can understand the thinking here in doing that. And actually, it's sort of interesting in thinking about why he did this. I went ahead and flipped the position, so let's try doing that to see what it looks like from Black's side of the board. And from his point of view, that the knight is right in the heart of his position, and it looks like it'd be a nice piece to trade off. And I can understand that. And furthermore, it looks like these pawns over here on the king side are a long way from ever threatening white's king. Whereas when I was on my side of the board, somehow these pawns seem closer, and this I was looking at his knight being a good defensive piece here on a6, because it's if I ever play b takes c5, he could just take back with the knight. And so I guess the thing I'm pointing out here is that it's an interesting exercise to flip the board every now and then. Ideally, you should be sort of board direction neutral. You should be able to sit on either side of the board and have it look just the same to you, and be able to arrive at the same strategies and move sequences and so on. But what I've found is that there's almost like an emotional response or something, a feeling you get about the position that is dependent on which side you're sitting on. And the features that look important to you from one side of the board are not always the same features that look important to you from the other side of the board. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Anyhow, Alex played his knight to c7, which the computer, of course, didn't like, but computers will do that sort of thing. The computer instead preferred to drop the bishop back to e7. Did it really? Let me see if I'm remembering this right. No, I wanted to play I was wondering why it didn't make sense undefending the e-pawn. It wanted to play the queen to e7. I guess I had that little note there because if it played bishop to e7, then the e-pawn hangs. But the point is you can play the queen to e7, but this pawn on d7 is still lost. And so that's the computer then says just go ahead and take it with the knight. Okay, he didn't do that. Instead, he dropped back with his knight. And after that, I took the pawn with my rook. That's, again, not what the computer likes best. So after, in this position, just before I took it with the rook, the advantage was getting up close to 4 pawns. But instead, after taking it with my rook, it dropped back in the lower, 2.3, 2.4 pawn range. So it's, significantly less good, but it's a threatening move. It forces the queen to move, and it was very easy to me to see what was going on. It's sort of the same situation as before. Instead, if I did what the computer wanted, and instead of taking with my rook, played b takes c5, attacking this pinned d-pawn, it will become very strong. He can break the pin with his bishop, but then I actually capture the d-pawn. I have this passed pawn, which is very strong, and even though he can cause my c-pawn to get where it can no longer support the d-pawn, my d-pawn is still adequately strong. And after another move or two, I check the king and then get my rook into c7. I mean, this just looks like a great game for white. So that's a nice sequence. And it's basically, it's better than what you can hope to get from the immediate rook to d6, although this turned out well too. So after I did that, Alex moved his queen that was attacked to e7. I doubled my rooks, now that my rook wasn't doing much good work on the c-file anymore. And at that point, he traded off the knights. This ends up not being good. It would have been better for him to just drop back in this position, to drop the knight back to e8 and chase my rook out of his nice post there on the 6th rank. Instead, he exchanged my knight, and that just sort of invites my queen deeper into his position. And now I started to have some dreams of maneuvering to c6 and attacking this loose rook that's on a8. He took my c-pawn, and now this causes more issues as well. And I forgot to turn the engine off. But you can see that evaluation is getting to be very high. After the c-pawn goes, then I have a very nice move. Oops. Sorry. And queen to d5. Check. And forking the king and the rook. And the king, I expected the king to move, and then I was prepared to take the rook, although I was a little worried about it because after taking the rook, I didn't want my queen to get trapped. So I was looking at a sequence such as the king going to h8, or could go to h7. That's another possibility. Then me taking the rook, and Alex playing his bishop to b7, which attacks my queen, and also this loose pawn on e4, but I can take the a-pawn here. I have to be careful that there's not a checking move, or you discover attacking my queen or something. It looked like I was slipping out, but it also looked like he would be getting some, maybe a little bit of counterplay. So I was planning after queen to d5 and the king moving to probably take the rook in a8, but I wanted to examine it some more before I did. Instead, Alex blocked with his queen on f7. And when I looked at this position a little bit, I realized I had another move that was simpler to analyze than getting my queen off into the corner. Namely, I could just pick up the bishop on f6, because it was undefended now, because the queen is pinned and it's blocking the defense of the rook on that bishop. Before the queen went there, the rook was defending it, and the queen was defending it. It was defended twice, but this effectively went from 2 defenses down to 0, and allowed me to just simply take it with my rook. And now, of course, if he were to play rook takes rook, then I can play rook takes rook check, Zug. He has to take back, or would take back, and then I could take this queen one way or another, probably with the pawn, and that would be, white would be, as you can see, a whole piece up, I guess, plus some pawns. 6 pawns to 5, so yeah, I have an extra knight. But he didn't do that. After I played in this position, right here, after I played rook takes f6, check, he looked at it a little bit and then resigned. So, another game in the win column, but of course it means the competition will get tougher again next week. And I'll be playing on board 2, and or possibly board 1, depends who shows up at the club, but for sure at least on board 2. And we'll see how that match goes in a few days more. But for now, this is Roger Capello saying so long until then.